Finding joy in silence, discover the power of stillness. Have you ever paused, not to check your phone, not to scroll, not to think, but truly paused? Have you ever sat in the middle of your own life, and listened, not to the voices of others, but to the absence of them? Most people haven't, and those who have, often run from it, because silence, for many, is uncomfortable, even terrifying. But why? We live in an age of constant stimulation. Every moment is filled with sound. Notifications, news, music, conversations, advertisements. Even our thoughts have become noisy. We wake up to alarms, we fall asleep to YouTube, and somewhere in between, we lose the ability to simply be. What happens when the music stops? When the world goes quiet, what happens? When it's just you and your breath? Most of us don't realize it, but we're not afraid of silence. We're afraid of what silence reveals. It reveals the voices we've buried, the pain we've ignored, the questions we never answered, and the truths we never dared to face. It's not the silence that's loud, it's what echoes inside it. Let me tell you a story. It begins in a city that never sleeps. Skyscrapers, deadlines, neon dreams, a young professional, successful by all definitions, well paid, well dressed, well liked, but deeply unsettled. They had everything, except peace. Every morning felt like a race, every night a collapse. They tried everything: yoga, podcasts, self-help books, but nothing stuck, until one day, after yet another sleepless night, they asked a question: what if the answer is not more? What if it's less? And so they packed a small bag, turned off their phone, and disappeared into the mountains, to a Buddhist monastery known only by whispers. There were no workshops, no gurus, just silence, real silence, not just the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. No one welcomed them with words. There was only a small sign at the gate: welcome. Breathe. Be still. At first, it was unbearable. Every thought screamed for attention. Am I doing this right? Why is it so quiet? This is pointless. I should go home. But then, something shifted. They noticed the sound of wind, of birds, of their own breath. They noticed that their thoughts weren't facts, they were just clouds, passing through an open sky, and for the first time in their life, they didn't chase them. You see, silence is not a void, it's not emptiness, it is the space in which the truth speaks, it is where the present moment lives, where clarity begins, and where suffering starts to unravel. In Buddhism, silence is not a retreat, it's a return to the self, to the breath, to the only place we ever truly live, now. And maybe, you've felt this too, that ache, that exhaustion, that sense that you're always on, but never really here. The invitation today is simple: don't escape the noise by running from it. Pause, breathe, let the silence show you what you've been too busy to see. Because within the noise, beneath the chaos, beyond the rushing and scrolling and striving, there is a stillness, a sacred stillness. It's been waiting for you. What if silence is not your enemy, but your teacher? In the chapters to come, we'll follow this young traveler's journey, from discomfort to insight, from restlessness to joy. We'll discover the sacred language of silence, not as emptiness, but as a path to wholeness. Each chapter is a step inward, a peeling back of layers, a remembering of who we truly are beneath the noise. So stay with us, listen deeply, and prepare to meet someone you may have forgotten, yourself, because sometimes, it is in the quietest moments that we hear the loudest truths. Welcome to Finding Joy in Silence. There are moments in life that don't arrive with fireworks, but with a hush, not with applause, but with presence. And sometimes, the greatest teachers say nothing at all. The monastery sat high in the misty mountains, where the clouds kissed the treetops, and the wind whispered through pine needles. Like ancient secrets, our traveler had arrived, not as a student, but as a seeker, carrying more questions than answers. There was no registration desk, no schedule, no spiritual merchandise, just a narrow wooden path, leading into stillness. They were greeted not by words, but by a bow, offered from a monk whose eyes seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 winters. And the lightness of a child at play, that monk was known only as Master Han, no titles, no sermons, no books to sign, only presence, radiant and quiet, like a lantern in deep fog. Master Han did not teach through speech, he taught through being, no lectures, no instructions, he simply lived in a way that reminded you how to return to yourself. Each morning, he would walk, barefoot, slowly, as if each step kissed the earth. And the traveler, curious yet cautious, followed from a respectful distance. The silence between them was not awkward, it was alive, as if the wind, the birds, the rustling leaves, were all part of a conversation, too sacred for language. At first, the traveler's mind rebelled. This is strange. What am I supposed to learn just by walking? Shouldn't I be doing something more productive? But even as the thoughts swirled, there was something soothing in the rhythm, the rise and fall of breath, the echo of steps on ancient stone, the quiet company of someone who expected nothing from them. For the first time, there was no need to perform, no one to impress, no need to explain who they were or why they came, just being. One afternoon, as they sat near the lotus pond, watching the ripples form and vanish, Master Han slowly approached. He didn't sit, he didn't speak, he simply held out a single leaf, autumn gold, frail yet vibrant. The traveler looked at it, confused. Was this a lesson, a metaphor, a koan? Master Han only smiled, placed the leaf in the traveler's hand, and walked away, his steps dissolving into the wind. In that moment, it hit them, the teaching wasn't in the words, but in the presence. The leaf was not a symbol, it was just a leaf, but in truly seeing it, without naming, judging, or analyzing, the traveler had touched stillness. That leaf was the first silence they had ever truly heard. Have you ever looked at something, with no need to define it? No need to share it on social media, no need to turn it into content, just looked? That's the beginning of seeing, not through the mind, but through the heart. What if the answers you're chasing don't live in more words, but in less noise? What if the next great teacher you meet won't be on a podcast, but in a moment of stillness? Can you imagine learning, not by filling your mind, but by emptying it? This was the first silence, and it changed everything. In the stillness of that mountain, the traveler didn't find a guru, they found a mirror, and slowly, without knowing it, they began to change, not by adding more, but by letting go. In the next chapter, we follow the traveler as they confront the chaos within, and learn the sacred art of listening to their own breath, because sometimes, the most profound journey begins not by moving forward, but by becoming still, and in that stillness, the silence speaks. Before there were mantras, before there were chants, before there were even words, there was breath, and perhaps, that's all we ever needed, to come home to ourselves. After many silent days in the monastery, the traveler began to notice something, not outside, but within. It started quietly, the sound of an inhale, a pause, an exhale, and then again. It was so ordinary, so constant, that it had become invisible. But now, in the space silence had carved open, the traveler could hear it, really hear it, not as background noise, not as biology, but as a gateway. They realized the breath had always been there, through joy, through heartbreak, through every failed dream, and every quiet hope. It had never left, never judged, never demanded, it just stayed, faithful, soft, present. The traveler began to sit by the edge of the lotus pond each morning, not to meditate in the traditional sense, but to listen to their own breathing, as if they were listening to an old friend who had waited patiently for years to be heard. In Buddhist practice, the breath is not just a function, it is a path, a mirror, a reminder that this moment is all we ever have. Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote, "Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor, the breath is the anchor, to now, to here, to life as it actually is, not as we wish it to be." One morning, as fog floated low across the hills, Master Han joined the traveler by the pond. Still, he said nothing, but this time, he simply sat there, for an hour, two, breathing, together, not in sync, not as technique, but as presence, and in that shared silence, the traveler felt something crack open, not a mystical vision, not an enlightenment flash, just a gentle shift, as if the mind had stopped running, and finally sat down, to rest. Have you ever paid attention to your breath? Really noticed it, not to control it, but to meet it, as it is, because within every inhale, there is a beginning, and within every exhale, a letting go. The breath teaches impermanence, it teaches surrender, it teaches that no matter how far we wander, we are always one breath away from coming back. Maybe your life feels chaotic right now, maybe your mind won't stop racing, maybe silence feels impossible, maybe you think, I don't have time to meditate. I don't know how to sit still. But what if I told you, you're already meditating? Every time you breathe with awareness, you don't need a cushion, you don't need a monastery, you don't need robes or incense. You only need this breath, right now. In Zen, there is a saying, when walking, just walk. When eating, just eat. And when breathing, just breathe. That's the essence of mindfulness, not doing more, but being here, fully. We often wait for life to give us a special moment. But the breath says, this is the moment, this one, this breath, this heartbeat. As the days passed, the traveler's restlessness softened, their need to understand everything faded, they began to walk slower, to smile more, to watch the leaves fall without needing to post about it, to feel their feet touching the ground, and their lungs rising like tides. They weren't doing mindfulness, they were becoming it, not chasing peace, but returning to it. We live in a time where people pay thousands of dollars to find themselves in distant countries, to reset in silence retreats, to disconnect from the noise. But what if the true retreat was never in Bali or the Himalayas, but right here, within your breath? You carry your peace with you. It's not outside, it's within. You've just forgotten how to listen. The traveler had begun to remember, not memories of the past, but the memory of presence, of simplicity, of enoughness. But silence is not always soft, sometimes, it reflects what we try hardest to avoid, and in the next chapter, the traveler will face what many of us run from, the storm within, because silence doesn't just heal, it also reveals, and when it does, the breath becomes not just comfort, but courage. So sit, close your eyes if you wish, and breathe, because the temple you're looking for was never built from stone, it was always here, it rises and falls, with each breath you take. Silence is beautiful, until it's not, until it stops being peaceful, and starts being loud, loud with the echoes of things left unsaid, loud with regrets, with shame, with questions you've buried deep, hoping never to hear them again. This is the part of silence no one posts on Instagram, the part that makes you want to get up and scroll, to run, to distract, to numb, but the traveler stayed, and so must we. It had been weeks now. The monastery no longer felt foreign, even the silence had begun to feel like a friend. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, and shadows stretched long across the earth, something stirred inside the traveler, a memory. A voice, a feeling. They sat in the meditation hall, candles flickering, everyone around them still, but inside, they were shaking, not from cold, but from truth. You're not good enough, you should have done more. Why did you say that? You'll never be free. The silence had peeled back the surface, and now, the storm had come, but it wasn't outside, it was within. In the teachings of the Buddha, we are told that suffering is not the enemy. Avoidance is. There is dukkha, the first noble truth, the inevitable suffering of being human, but it is in turning toward that suffering, with mindfulness and compassion, that we transform it, not escape, not suppress, but look directly into its eyes, and say, I see you. Master Han approached the traveler that night, no words, again, just a glance, and then he walked away, toward the forest path, an invitation. The traveler followed, in silence, step by step, no questions, just breath, and fear, and breath again. The path grew darker, trees hung low, crickets stirred, and yet, something sacred. Master Han stopped at a small clearing, a single lantern hung from a branch. Casting golden light on the forest floor, there, he finally spoke, "This is where I met my suffering. I sat here, under this tree, and faced my own storm. Not to win, but to stop running. And so will you." Then he walked away, leaving the traveler alone, in the forest, in the dark, with themselves. Have you ever sat alone in the dark, and realized the scariest part wasn't the dark itself, but what came up inside you? Have you felt that knot in your chest, when everything goes quiet, that ache you've ignored, by staying busy, working late, binging shows, overthinking? Yes, that ache. It's not your enemy, it's your wound, asking to be seen. The lotus cannot bloom without the mud, and you cannot grow without facing the pain you've buried. But listen carefully, you are not your pain, you are the space that holds it, you are the awareness that sees it arise, and watches it fade. In meditation, we are not erasing pain. We are becoming the vastness that holds it. The sky is never broken by the storm, it only watches, and so do you. The traveler sat all night under that tree, thoughts raced, tears came, memories of mistakes, words they never said, people they lost, people they hurt, and yet, they stayed. No escape, no stories, just presence. Each breath became an act of courage, each moment, a small surrender, until the storm softened, until the wind inside grew still, and in that stillness, a strange sensation appeared, peace, not because everything was fixed, but because they had stopped resisting. Modern psychology and Buddhist practice meet here, in radical self-acceptance. You are not broken, you are not wrong for hurting, you are not weak for crying, you are human, and when you sit with your pain, not judging, not fixing, you begin to heal, because pain that is felt fully begins to flow. It's stuck pain that turns into suffering. You don't need to go to a forest, you don't need a monk to guide you, you only need 5 minutes, 5 breaths, and the courage to pause, sit, breathe, and feel whatever rises, without pushing it away. Name it, see it, and return to the breath. Do this again. And again. And again. This is the storm's lesson, that sometimes, the only way out, is in. As the morning light touched the trees, the traveler stood from the forest floor, not as someone who had conquered their demons, but as someone who had sat with them. Silence had hurt, but it had also healed, and now, a new kind of silence was waiting, not the silence of absence, but the silence of fullness, the kind that listens, that holds, that understands. There is a kind of silence, that doesn't feel empty, but full of presence, full of peace, full of something we can't quite name, but have always longed for. This is the silence that follows the storm, not because the world has changed, but because you have. This is sacred stillness. The traveler walked out of the forest, not with answers, but with a stillness in their step, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of understanding. The monastery looked the same, but felt different. Why? Because they had changed, and when you change, the world does too. In Buddhism, we speak of sati, mindfulness, but mindfulness isn't just noticing, it's remembering. Remembering to come back, to be present, to stop searching for more, because maybe, there is nothing missing, maybe, what we've been looking for, was never somewhere else, just somewhere quieter. Think of a still lake. When the wind stops, the surface becomes calm, so clear, it reflects the sky, but that clarity was always there. It didn't arrive, it was revealed. This is sacred stillness, not something we create, but something we uncover, when we stop stirring the waters of the mind. Later that day, the traveler sat with Master Han under a Bodhi tree, no ritual, no incense, just silence, and tea. After a long pause, Master Han said, "You've tasted stillness, haven't you?" The traveler nodded. They didn't know how to describe it. It was too vast for words. Master Han smiled. Now, the real practice begins. Many people seek peace as a feeling, he said, but true peace is not a feeling, it's a way of being. You can feel sadness, and still have peace. You can face loss, and still be grounded in stillness. Peace is not found by escaping life, but by embracing it so fully, that even the waves feel like part of the ocean. Have you ever sat in silence, not to fix anything, not to achieve anything, but just to be? It feels strange at first, like you're wasting time, like something should be happening, but stay long enough. And the noise quiets, the need to be somewhere else dissolves, and suddenly, you feel something deeper than calm, you feel whole, you feel like nothing is missing. In the Mahayana tradition, we are taught about sunyata, emptiness, but it's not a nihilistic void, it's spaciousness, the emptiness that allows fullness, like the space in a cup that makes it useful, like the pause between notes that makes music. Stillness is where wisdom speaks. Where we realize that craving ends. Not when we get what we want, but when we remember that we already have what we need. In the days that followed, the traveler walked the same stone paths, but now, every footstep felt sacred, each breath was a prayer, each tree, a companion, each moment a doorway, not to escape, but to arrive. They no longer searched for silence, they were the silence, a silence that listens, that embraces, that loves. You don't need a monastery to find this. Stillness is not a place, it's a practice. It's in the way you sip your morning tea, in the way you breathe before replying to a text, in how you pause before filling the space with noise. You can bring sacred stillness into your job, your home, your relationships, because true stillness is not separate from the world. It's what lets you meet the world with clarity and compassion. 1. Begin your day with one silent breath before reaching for your phone. 2. Create micro-Sabbaths, 1-minute pauses throughout your day. 3. Sit in silence for 10 minutes, not to meditate, but just to listen. 4. Eat one meal in silence each week. Feel every bite. 5. Walk slowly, mindfully. Let your feet kiss the earth. These are not escapes, they are returns. Each pause is a path home. On the final day of their retreat, the traveler watched the sunrise in stillness, not chasing it, not capturing it, just being there, and in that moment, something shifted. They realized, the silence was not the goal, it was the ground beneath every step. It was the essence of life itself, not empty, but so full, that words could never hold it. Stillness, once touched, stays with you, even in chaos, even in sorrow. But how do we carry it into the noisy, messy, beautiful chaos of real life? How do we return to the world, without losing the silence within? The monastery gates opened, not with a sound, but with a shift. The traveler stepped through, back into the noise of the world, children crying, vendors calling, phones ringing, deadlines looming, but something was different. They didn't flinch, they didn't recoil, they smiled, not because the world had changed, but because now, they carried silence within. You see, the world didn't suddenly become peaceful, people still shouted in traffic. Co-workers still brought their chaos, bills still arrived without apology. But silence is not about the absence of noise, it's the presence of awareness, a quiet mind in a noisy world, a still heart in a restless society. True silence is not something you visit, it's something you become. Buddhism teaches us the middle way, not rejecting the world, not clinging to it, but walking through it, awake. Stillness is not the opposite of engagement, it is the foundation of skillful action. When your inner world is silent, you can finally hear what life is really saying. Imagine this, you're in a meeting, tension rising, egos clashing, everyone talking, no one listening, but instead of reacting, you pause, you breathe, you feel the ground beneath you, and in that pause, something powerful happens. You see clearly, you speak, not from fear, but from clarity. Your silence disrupts the noise more than shouting ever could. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "The most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will bloom like flowers." You don't have to preach, you don't have to convince, just be silent, and fully there. In a world addicted to reaction, presence is revolutionary. So how do you bring sacred silence into a modern life? The silent commute, leave the music off. No podcasts. Just you and the breath, the mindful reply, before sending that email or message. Pause. Is it necessary? Is it kind? The sacred chore, turn washing dishes into meditation. One plate. One breath. No rush, the listening ritual, each day, listen to someone without interrupting. Just hold space, the tech-free zone, create 1 hour a day with no screens. Let your mind come home, these are not rules, they are reminders, tiny doorways back to stillness. As the traveler returned to the city, they didn't need to protect their silence, they shared it, not with words, but with presence. When friends vented, they listened. When strangers hurried, they walked slowly. When moments felt chaotic, they smiled inwardly, not to escape, but because they knew, even in the noise, they could hear the silence. In many Buddhist monasteries, there is a bell, not just for ritual, but as a reminder. Each time the bell rings, you stop, you breathe, you return. But what if you made your life the bell? Let the sound of your child's laughter be the bell, let the rush of traffic be the bell, let the chaos itself call you home, because when you're truly present, everything becomes your teacher. You don't have to wait for peace, you don't need perfect conditions, or a retreat, or a mountain cave. You can find silence, right here, in this breath. Let it begin, in the cracks between conversations, in the stillness after a sigh, in the moments when you choose not to react. You carry silence with you, always. The question is, will you remember? Remember, silence is not the end of the path, it's the beginning. We don't meditate to escape the world, we meditate to meet it fully. We don't go inward to avoid life, we go inward so we can live with wisdom. Stillness is not hiding, stillness is power, a power that does not dominate, but transforms. That evening, the traveler stood on a crowded street, noise, light, life swirling around them, and yet, inside, still, they took one deep breath, and smiled, because they no longer needed silence, to be quiet inside. They were the silence, and wherever they went, peace followed. But silence is not a destination, it's a doorway back to yourself, to life, to joy. In our final chapter, we'll return to where it all began, not to close the journey, but to realize, it was never far away. The journey has taken us deep, through the chaos, through the silence, through the paradoxes, and now we return, not to where we began, but to somewhere new, somewhere home. Life is a circle, we start in the noise, and then we retreat into silence. But silence is not a place to stay, it's a way to return. When we come back to the world, we come with fresh eyes, we come with fresh breath, and that is the beginning of joy. Buddhism speaks of the idea of home, but not as a physical place, not as a location we travel to. Home is within, it's the place where you no longer search for external happiness, because you have discovered that joy is not outside of you, it's in your very being. In stillness, you find your heart, and in your heart, you find your home. When you return from the silence, you no longer approach the world the same way. You see the small things, the beauty in a stranger's smile, the grace in a raindrop falling, the rhythm of your breath, rising and falling with each moment. Everything that once seemed ordinary, now holds extraordinary meaning. You no longer need to chase after joy, you stop searching for it in distractions, in accomplishments, in things that come and go, because you've learned the simplest truth: joy is in presence. Just as the Buddha smiled in the face of life's challenges, you, too, can smile, not because the world is perfect, but because you are awake to it. So, how do you live this new reality? How do you carry this joy into your everyday life? The morning silence. Start your day with 10 minutes of silence. Before reaching for your phone or jumping into the noise, sit with your breath, the sacred pause, throughout your day. Take pauses. When life feels overwhelming, just stop, close your eyes, feel your breath, find your center. The joyful offering, offer something simple, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear. In giving, you receive. In silence, you connect. The quiet walk. Take a walk in nature or around your neighborhood. No music, no distractions, just walk, breathe, and observe. The world will reveal itself in ways you've never seen before. Stillness you'll find, is not the absence of life. It's the fullest engagement with it. You're not running away from the world, you're running toward it, but from a place of peace. This is the paradox: when you stop chasing, you catch everything. When you stop striving, you find abundance. Stillness doesn't mean silence forever, it means knowing when to return to it, so you can meet the world with renewed clarity. Let me share a moment with you. One day, as I was walking through the park, I noticed something. A little girl was skipping through the grass, her laughter light and free. She didn't care about time, or noise, or deadlines. She was simply there, and in that moment, I remembered, this is joy, no grand achievement, no external validation, just the purity of being alive. I realized that joy is found in the spaces between the thoughts, in the quiet moments that punctuate our day. It's in the stillness. Now, I invite you. Take this journey with me, take these teachings, these practices, and let them become your life. If you found something here that resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself, share it, spread this message of stillness and joy, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, so we can continue this journey together. Join me on Zen Buddhism Wisdom for more insights, more teachings, and more stories that will help you live with purpose. Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful, leave a comment below. What is the moment when you felt true joy in silence? Let's start a conversation, and if you've enjoyed this content, hit the bell icon, so you'll never miss an episode. As we close this chapter, I leave you with one thought: silence is not an escape from life, it's a return to it, a return to yourself, a return to joy, a return to home. In this stillness, we find everything. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May your silence bring you peace, may your silence bring you joy, and may you always return to the truth of who you are. Thank you for being with me today. I'll see you in the next video.